I'm Vidya Soundarajan with WWF-India. I'll briefly introduce the panelists and then hand it over to our very incapable hands of our moderator. First off, I would like to welcome Mr. Suresh Kumar, who is the Chief Principal Secretary and Advisor to the Chief Minister of Punjab. He's an IAS officer with a huge experience of systems, governance, and agriculture practice. And he brings to this table, this conversation, the perspective of system, institution, and governance. And we are really grateful to have you, sir, with us today. We also have Dr. Pratap Singh Birthal, who is currently a national professor, ICAR national professor at the National Institute of Agriculture, Economics, Policy and Research. He's won numerous awards. He's done multiple research and has led and has done significant contribution to the field of agriculture economics and policy. And I think he would be bringing that perspective of agriculture economics, policy, and the academician's point of view in the way forward. We also have Ramisetti Murali. He's a social worker who's dedicated decades of his life to working with the farmers at the village level. He's been working on water, health, nutrition, primarily agriculture. He's also the founding director of the organization called MARI, which is Modern Architects of Rural India, very active in the state of Telangana. Welcome, Murali. Finally, from our own WWF family, we have Aaron Mcnevin. He is our global lead for the WWF network across all the countries for aquaculture. He's also the vice president of aquaculture in WWF US. He's been very closely involved with a number of projects in Asia and South Asia on aquaculture, seafood. He's personally led sort of movements of change with the Seafood Task Force. He's currently involved in sort of leading a traceability project, which WWF is working on. I think fundamentally, he would be bringing in the perspective of asking the question of should sustainable farming be the norm or should sustainable farming be an exception, and drive towards a greater sustainable agriculture. Welcome, Aaron. To the table. And finally, but most importantly, our moderator, who we all know, whoever has worked in agriculture would certainly know. I welcome Arindam Datta, who is the Executive Director of Rabobank. He also heads the Asia Sustainability at Rabobank, has been very closely involved with innumerable initiatives, both at a policy, at a strategic, financial, systemic level in India and in Asia, on transforming the rural space, the rural finance, banking, access to finance in the agriculture sector. He would be the sort of ideal person to sort of string all together the conversation and find a pathway for the future in this changing landscape of agriculture. With that, I hand over to Arindam, who will basically drive and lead the conversation today. And welcome to all. Over to you, Arindam. And may I request all the panelists to unmute themselves, please? Thank you. And wherever possible, have the video on.
Thank you, Vidya. It's a pleasure to be a moderator for this extremely interesting session. Firstly, congratulations to WWF for having completed 50 years, and I wish you all the best for the next 50 years because a lot of work still needs to be done. And it's a pleasure to have 4 esteemed panelists for the discussions today, and a warm welcome to all the participants also. So the topic for today's discussion is sustainable food systems. Now, it's a very, very large and complex topic, but let's try to flesh out what are the 4 key elements or dimensions of sustainable food systems. The first is about nutrition security for the population. I'm consciously using the term nutrition security and not food security because it's nutrition which is more important than just availability, access, and affordability of food. The second is about the ecological and environmental sustainability, which has a lot of dimension as the population increases, as agriculture becomes more intensive, how do we ensure that Mother Nature remains as good as it was in the earlier part of the century? The third part about this is managing risk in the agriculture system, especially the climate risk, because whether we like it or not, it's coming. And how do we manage it when we try to grow the availability of food and nutritious and safe food for the teeming population? And last and most important, specifically in the Indian Asian context, is how do we ensure farmer livelihoods? And the farmer needs to be in the center of this so-called transformation process. Now, transformation is a very, very strong word. So I would like to talk more about the transition that we move towards what we define as sustainable food systems. How do we transition as a country to a food system which is more sustainable? And it's a pleasure to have with us Mr. Suresh Kumar. As Vidya says, he comes with decades and decades of very rich experience on policy making for Government of Punjab, Government of India. So first, I would like to request Mr. Suresh Kumar to give the keynote address, and post that we'll have a panel discussion. So the way we have planned it is we have a total of 90 minutes. We'll have approximately 15 minutes for the keynote address by Mr. Suresh Kumar. Post that, we'll have a 50 minutes panel discussion. We will have two questions which can be answered in approximately 5 minutes per panelist. And we will have a third question which will require a very short answer. And the third question will be based on what we hear from the esteemed panelists for the first two questions. With that, I would like to, and sorry, just to add one more point, as the moderator, I also need to be the timekeeper. So excuse me for that, but I need to manage time also to ensure that we have a very good conversation for the next 85 odd minutes. With that, I would like to hand over the stage to Mr. Suresh Kumar, please, for your keynote address.
Thank you, Arindam. Thank you, Vidya. Thank you, WWF, for this opportunity. Good evening to all the participants and co-panelists. Now, though it's very easily said that sustainable food system, I think Arindam had hit on the nail. It's not complex, it is very, very chaotic if one has to define the food systems and talk about food systems. If you talk of any food system, any food policy or agriculture policy, all these are correlated subjects and topics. There is one basic aim and objective is that we need to ensure quality food for everybody, and that means access to food every day, all time, in adequate quantities. Now, whatever we've done as a nation, meaning India or elsewhere in the world, each country has been trying to achieve food self-sufficiency and food security for its own people. Very happy, particularly being from Punjab, to report that we did it very successfully in our country, and Punjab are the original revolution areas of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP were the key states which led to the country for food security. We, as these three states, contribute about 30 million tons of food grains, wheat and rice to the central pool with a kind of annual requirement of about 45 million, though our present stocks are about 87, 89 million tons. But that clearly indicates the country had enough. In the times of COVID, the COVID crisis, when everywhere elsewhere in the world, you heard of the food shortages and all. This country, India as a nation, did not feel any such problem. And we had adequate food stocks, wheat and rice, that we could even feed over 800 million people without any cost to them. We had all kinds of crises. We had migrant labor crisis, we had job losses, we had health crisis, but we never had the crisis of hunger or food shortages even in the times of COVID, the pandemic which continues. While the objective of any food system is to ensure access to quality food anywhere, all time, with adequate quantities, and we seem to have achieved that. But is the way we have achieved that, is that sustainable? We may say so, that we have adequate quantities in aggregate numbers, aggregate stocks. And right from 1966, 1961, when the Green Revolution was thought over, we had always emphasized that we must have adequate stocks. We didn't want to go back to what we faced, the US law, PL 480 law, and then we were probably committed to give enough foods and we didn't have enough. And as a result, the national government woke up to the realities, particularly after the famine we had in 1921, the Bengal famine, and these things like that. There are fundamental issues which the way food system, the food policy has evolved in India. We were concentrated, although Green Revolution, we achieved the numbers and achieved the stocks. We were always been concentrating on aggregate stocks, increasing the farm production, increasing productivity, surely, but at a cost of higher input subsidies, at a cost of higher storage subsidies, at a cost of higher input subsidies. We did evolve and adopt new practices. We did bring in high-yielding varieties of rice and wheat from elsewhere in the world. We did evolve a minimum support price-based government procurement system to procure enough stocks for the central pool. We did build buffer stocks, which today we have extra buffer stocks. We had public distribution system, revamped it, targeted it, but still not as resilient as it should be. We kind of evolved the market regulations and the APMC regulations, some of which has been undone in the last 3 months in the country. And finally, we reached a stage in 2013 where we enacted the National Food Security Law, where we ensured that everybody and anybody who deserves to be fed and who gets enough quality food at a reasonable price, at an affordable price. So if you look at this evolution of the food systems and the food policies and programs in this country, what have you achieved? We have achieved higher productions and productivity. Surely, nobody can question that. We have achieved higher per capita availability of food grains. Nobody can question that. We have achieved higher per capita farm productivity. Nobody can question that. Nobody in the world can say that India is not self-sufficient or self-reliant. I will also go to the extent of saying, being from Punjab and this MSP-based procurement system and the PDS, the food prices we have been able to maintain at an affordable level. 200,000 crores of subsidies going to this maintaining the affordable food prices. I have always been questioning, as Agriculture Secretary of the state, though I am not an expert, I may have the experience, I don't claim any expertise on the subject. I'm a plain and simple civil servant and I'm a plain and simple administrator. I do the things in a very, very plain and simple way. Nobody can question that we have not been able to supply food at the affordable prices. But there have been problems. And these problems clearly prove the way food system has evolved over the years, it is not sustainable. To begin with, the Green Revolution has not been all-inclusive. There have been disparities. There have been spatial, regional disparities. The vulnerable populations did not get the kind of benefit they should have achieved through Green Revolution. Most of the agricultural land in the Green Revolution area is owned by people and landed communities. The Dalits, the vulnerable, the deprived classes have no ownership to the land. They were workers, and they remained workers. They were dependent on for their livelihood on agriculture. They are still dependent on a. In fact, the contribution of agriculture in the GDP has come down to 16-17%, whereas the pressure on the agriculture for the livelihood provisioning remains almost the same. Even in Punjab today, roughly 50% of the population is dependent for their livelihood on agriculture. So your contribution, the cake is getting smaller. The people who have to share that cake probably remain almost the same. Then food subsidies have become unsustainable. The PDS systems involve 108,000 crores. The agriculture production systems, the fertilizers, the water subsidy, the power subsidy, the subsidies on the marketing and subsidies, the transportation subsidies, subsidies involved in insecticide, pesticide, agrochemicals, all put together is over 200,000 crores. Are these subsidies really sustainable? A country like India is not able to sustain that. While there's enough to eat, you may say as a country as a whole, we have surplus food. Poverty, 40% people are still poor. 40% people do not still have enough money to buy quality food. So poverty still remains a key aspect of the food security and food systems. We've not been able to address that. Now, building upon the example of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, the 2.5 states are the original Green Revolution states. In 1961, if you go by the history and geography of Punjab, when Haryana was not there, there used to be at least 38 crops in the Punjab. Today we have 7-8 main crops. We have lost on the crop diversity. We have lost on the biodiversity. With excessive use of agrochemicals, pesticides, insecticides, there has been huge damage to the biodiversity. Mr. Datta said that, and I have no hesitation to admit, all this has an environmental impact. We are losing out on the soil quality. We are losing out on the water quality. Not many of you would, maybe WWF knows about it, Sumit and others, Ravi and all who've been working in Punjab and working and talking to us. They would know about it, that the groundwater in Punjab is contaminated. We don't have any major minerals in Punjab, but we have uranium in water. We have lead in water. We have aluminum in water. We have many more metals in the water. Water contamination, people are drinking contaminated water. Even agriculture is being irrigated through contaminated subsoil water. How do we check that? Then, in terms of aggregate stocks and enough in your tummies, you have achieved, we as a country have achieved food self-sufficiency or food security. We have surely compromised on nutrition security. Per capita availability of wheat and rice has increased. Even in Punjab, per capita availability of milk remains the highest in the country. But what else? Where are proteins? Where are pulses? Where are oil seeds? Where are fruits and vegetables? Not many people will believe or agree. Punjab is net importing in fruits and vegetables. We import pulses, we import oil seeds. Where are those things? When I joined the service in 1993, and I came to Punjab for the first time, I'm not local from Punjab. There used to be groundnuts, there used to be oil seeds, there used to be peanuts, there used to be many more things we used to see in the farms. Today it is all across wheat and rice. And we are not a rice consuming state because the country needed the rice, so we produced the rice. Country needed to produce more wheat, we produce more wheat. And in the process, farmers did get more money and the remuneration increased. And it doesn't end that. It is not that the environmental damage and damage to natural resources are that. Agriculture in Punjab has moved away from what may be called as a natural agriculture. We are not doing natural agriculture because Punjab should not be producing rice. Our agroclimatic conditions are such that we should be producing many more things. Citrus is another thing. Maize is, we were originally a maize producing state. We get good in pulses and other coarse grains. So there has been compromise on the nutrition standards of people, but in the process, and Vidya may like to hear that, in the process of evolution of the food systems and food programs in Punjab and elsewhere in the country, there has been serious compromises on gender equities. People in South, all my experience and learning is in Punjab. People outside, southwestern Punjab, the work women do is not recognized. Malnutrition in the women and the girls and young adolescent girl is not recognized. Somebody has to do it. You may like to see that, yes, over the years with the excessive farm productivity and farm productions, people have got more money. At the same time, today Punjab farmer is debt stressed. I'll just give you one example. In the year 1961-62, the per capita debt was about 1,200, 1,300 rupees, about $100 per capita per farming family. Today, this debt is about 300,000 rupees per family. There has been substantial increase. The national per capita debt, farm debt, is about 1,50,000 Indian rupees, and Punjab is double the national average. While the remuneration, the incomes rose, the expenditure, the input cost rose, the cost of living increased. As a result, farmers are financially stressed. So to me, and it is, I know Anindam is too keen to stop me, and I should stop at some point of time.
Sir, you have 5 more minutes. Please go ahead.
See, there is a damage to environment, there is damage to human health, the remuneration is squeezing in, the resources are squeezing in, the pressure on land is increasing, the land quality, the water quality is declining. With all those negatives, there has to be a new approach to the food system. And that new approach, I call it new narrative for India. We have to change from more aggregate production to more diversified production, high value quality production that ensures not only that you have enough stocks in aggregate numbers, but you have enough quality diverse production which meets the requirements of your nutrition security or your nutrition requirements. Whatever crops you shift to, those crops need to be climate resilient. What practices you change to, those structural and transformational changes have to come in. You need to have climate resilient practices. You need to have low water consuming crops. You need to have crops which give you better value in the market. You need to have crops which are traded well in the market, which are traded well without the government, and you cannot always count on the government support. Unfortunately, the food system and the food policies have not interacting with very many other policies. There are very many other non-agricultural policies on urbanization, on investments, on climate change. They all need to account for, Mr. Datta said that the kind of greenhouse gases emitted from the agriculture sector out of a total area of, let's say, 10 million acres, everything is, agriculture is done like a mining of land. The greenhouse emissions, the greenhouse gases are emitted. If those have to be tackled, all your technology policies, urbanization policies, policies on economic matter, fiscal matters have to account for what agriculture does that. Also, the green revolution has to spread to the areas which have not been included in green revolutions. Also to the communities and the classes of people and the particularly the youth, the Dalits, the women who have been left out. Subsidies cannot merely be focused on the food distribution and food production. You need to repurpose subsidies, maybe from inputs to livelihood improvement and carbon subsidies, carbon credits. You need to repurpose. The more you save on greenhouses, the more incentives you get. The more capital investments, how does that improve the livelihood? Then all those institutions which are responsible for managing, encouraging diversifying the food system, there has to be structural changes. I keep saying the Food Corporation of India, they only procure for the PDS, the public distribution system. Why should they not do commercial purchases? Why should they not get into the food exports? If 30 million tons, the 40 million tons is lying surplus with you, and you will get the more crops coming in, more production coming in. Why can't that be sold in the open market and people can trade on that? I mean, there's some kind of a, then of course, not much has been done on the value addition, food processing. That's another area which should be done. Attempt has been made to improve the regulations and targeting of food distribution. There is a misconception about that. I don't want to get into that debate which is going on. I think this may be not the appropriate forum on the recent farm laws and recent legislation, central legislation. But apparently those legislations also do not fully reflect on the ground situation. How do you expose the farmers? 86.2% farmers are below 5 acres, and you're suddenly telling them, okay, no regulation, totally unregulated trade, do what you like, earn what you like, produce what you like, and no regulation will be there. Can a 2-acre farmer compete in the market? Can intermediaries or the so-called middlemen be removed overnight? Is there any trading in this country which is done without the intermediaries? Give me one. Non-financial agriculture, non-agriculture. Is there anything which happens without the intermediaries? Anywhere in the world. If today our market has to be open to the big buyers, why not? Big exporters and importers, why not? But will that the owner of the company or the investor come and sit in the market? No, they will have some intermediaries somewhere. If the intermediaries are licensed under the APMC Act, why should we object to them? There has to be transparent, regulatory. Of course, I would say this should not be following in the regulations, but we need to promote trading in agriculture, rule-based trading in agriculture through some well-defined regulations. And last and not the least, we have seen in agriculture, in the Green Revolution, post-Green Revolution area, which is what I call is the low risk or the least risk agriculture. Everything is assured. All inputs are assured, all subsidies are assured, marketing is assured, everything is assured. If you really open up the market for free trading, for open trading, why not? But there has to be risk mitigation mechanism also. Let's not forget that agriculture in this country is small, localized, and subsistence agriculture. In such a situation where 86.2% farm holdings are small, less than 5 acres, is local, is subsistence, it is small, they cannot transport their use distant far and distant markets. In such a situation, should the government not put in place a risk mitigation mechanism, whether through insurance or some other way of doing it, and shift from excess to aggregate stocks or wheat and rice or food grain, access to wholesome food or access to nutritious food, or develop systems, and I'll stop at that. Food systems, food policies, and all complementary policies, all other sector non-agriculture policies impinging upon the food systems, which are nutrition sensitive, which are climate resilient, and as Arindam said, he has acknowledged it, which protect and save the livelihood of our people. You cannot take away the livelihood of people through any reforms and any new systems or new approach to the food system. That livelihood gives them less than what they have been earning so far. Whatever new approach or new system you put in place, it has to give them something more than what they have been earning so far or what they have achieved so far. If we give them more than what they have achieved in terms of their livelihood, in terms of their living standards, probably the farmers will also change. And I can tell you from my experience of over 3.5 decades in Punjab and working with Punjab farmers are willing to change. Farmers realize there's a need to change. Farmers know the business as usual, the present way of doing business in agriculture and the food sector is not sustainable. But to improve sustainability, the approach has to change. Approach has to cater to the livelihood and reflect on the fully on the ground realities. Approach has to respect to the requirements of our soil systems, our water systems, and other systems we have in position. I'll give you just one example, and those of you who have an Indian experience. Why should Rajasthan be producing rice when they don't have adequate water to drink? 60%, 57% of water from Punjab goes to Rajasthan just for drinking purposes. And people there in Rajasthan have no regulation to see that nobody is allowed to do the water guzzling crops and produce paddy. The moment you cross over from Punjab to Rajasthan, people use that water for rice cultivation. Why should that be permitted? There has to be a law, there has to be regulation. If you naturalize agriculture, conserve resources, protect the livelihood, and be nutrition sensitive and climate resilient, these ground realities have to be looked into, and the food systems, in whichever way they are recast, they are reframed, or a new approach to food system is taken, they have to address this. I'll stop at that. If there are questions, I can answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We will get back with the questions, but before that, please to participate in the panel discussion also, because I have one or two controversial but interesting questions for you based on what you have. Thank you, sir, for magnifying the issue that the different dimensions of agriculture, at times they look very contradictory. If you do well in one, you have a negative impact in some other aspect of agriculture or the ecosystem. Thank you so much for setting the context. With that, I will move first to Mr. Murli, because he has a lot of experience, ground level experience of working with farmers, farmer organizations, and farmers are at the thick of action. Now, Mr. Murli, my question is, there is so much of expectations from the farmers that they need to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z. They need to change their farming pattern. They need to get in investment. They need to manage their soil. They need to be able to access the right kind of markets. We are putting a lot of burden on the farmers, and the production risk is taken only by the farmer. The other supply chain, value chain players do not participate in the production risk. We are asking the farmer to take all the risk, and the rest of the supply chain players just stay silent till the food comes to their level. So, Mr. Murli, how do you look at farmers and farmer organizations to be able to participate meaningfully, improving their welfare at the same time taking care of the large food system issues? Over to you, Mr. Murli, about 4.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And for the past 25 years, I've been working with the farming community. And my sharing in this webinar today is basically from my recent experience with the farmers in Warangal district, where we made an effort to change the production system towards more sustainable agriculture. So I am basically speaking from my practical experience with the farmers in the past few years. And first of all, I would like to mention that farmers are also very much conscious about the impact of the modern agriculture on their own health, on the health of the consumer, and on the nature, environment, and also what is it really doing to their own economy. So they're very much conscious, and whenever an outsider goes with a kind of proposal for triggering change in their production system, they're extremely receptive. So I'm very happy about the kind of experience and response I've had from the farmers. But there are quite a few challenges that we have faced in organizing the farming community to shift to production systems and practices which are very nature friendly and environmentally sustainable. I think number one, while the farmers are very receptive to this kind of ideas, the challenge that we have confronted is the knowledge systems. Farmers are familiar with these crops, which are very much to do with the sustainable food production systems. While they are familiar with the crops, but the knowledge of the production systems have gradually diminished because of the shift to more market-oriented kind of production system. So the traditional knowledge system has diminished, nor the existing extension system, which is supposed to provide support services to the farmers, is prepared, geared up to facilitate that kind of transition in the local farming systems. So we have faced problems on both sides with respect to the knowledge systems of the farmers, as well as the kind of capacity that exists with the extension mechanism to be able to trigger and facilitate this kind of change. And number two is the input supply system. So like when farmers are going for the established major crops such as cotton, paddy or maize, the input supply system is very well organized. But when they want to adopt this kind of transition, the input supply system is not so well organized, starting from seeds to other soil fertility improvement inputs, pest management input. Every aspect was having very serious kind of challenges, and the local market is not able to really cater to the needs of the farmers who were trying to adopt these kind of changes in their production system to make it much more environmentally sustainable and also to make it more healthier for the consumers. And other thing is like our farmers also faced challenges in terms of accessing the credit. As long as they are growing cotton and paddy kind of crops, the local lending institutions, particularly the actors who are operating in the informal lending environment, were very much willing to provide credit for the established production systems such as cotton-based or paddy-based, etc. But when the farmers were shifting to crops like millets, and also in one area where we tried nutrition-linked vegetable production, the lenders were not coming forward to provide the same scale of credit to the farmers. In fact, in some cases, they were also demanding to repay the outstanding debts of the previous years, because they had a kind of serious doubt whether when farmers are shifting to this kind of new production systems, whether they would be able to gain any profit from their agriculture and have the capacity to be able to repay their loans. So those were some of the main challenges. And also, I think there's very much need to educate the consumers also. Consumers today are very much looking forward for safe food. But where is this safe food production happening? And what are the parameters to be able to check the quality of the safe food being produced by those farmers? And more importantly, building the trust among the consumers. So there's always a suspicion when the small producers take their food in the label of safe food, it's not easily trusted by the consumers. I think there has to be some kind of interfacing mechanism. The other professional bodies and institutions who should be able to support the farmers to reach out their produce to the market. Without having such a kind of support system, farmers have really great difficulty in, they make a serious effort in producing the safe food, but in marketing, they have really serious kind of difficulties. And also other important challenge we have come across is processing. In the case of millets, almost about 2,500 farmers have adopted, mainly as a kind of climate risk resilient production system. They have come forward to go for millets and they have cultivated millets. But there is absolutely no infrastructure locally available to process the millets. And millets is something that you cannot sell directly to the consumer. There has to be processing units available at the local level. And such a kind of infrastructure is not available. I think actors who are trying to promote this kind of transition in the production system of the farmers, particularly the smallholders, should be able to invest in the infrastructure required for storage and processing. I think I would say in the first round, these are the most important kind of challenges where the outside actors who are trying to trigger this kind of change should be able to focus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Murli. With that, I'll go to Dr. Bithal. It's a pleasure to have you on the panel. And we heard the big view of what's gone right, what's gone wrong, and what is the way forward from the keynote speaker. Then we got a ground level, view on the issues that the farmers do face on in their daily life during the crop production cycle. So with your tremendous experience in the Indian agriculture sector, sir, the two questions I have for you is, for the Indian research and academia, now, how closely integrated are they with the mainstream private sector food and agri companies? That's one, because in Germany, Netherlands, US, we see them working seamlessly. I don't know whether it happens in India to that extent. We'd like to have your view, because as Mr. Suresh Kumar said, the agri transition leading to transformation needs multiple stakeholders to come together. So how can the organizations you represent get all the stakeholders together? Second is, are we making enough investments in agriculture, in research? Because your friend, sir, Dr. Ashok Gulati, keeps saying that the amount we spend on seed research is less than what Bayer's, individually as a company spends, or a Syngenta spends. So India spends much less. So what is the way forward, sir? Over to you, Dr. Vittal. You're on mute, sir. You're still on mute. Can the organizers unmute Dr. Vittal?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's okay. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you are.
Hello, am I audible now? Yeah, thank you,
Yes, sir.
Datta Sahab, and I thank WWF for giving me this opportunity to share my views on Indian agriculture. Particularly, let me begin with your second question first, the investment in agricultural R&D. The fact is that we don't spend much on agriculture R&D, and at present, our spending is just 0.6% of our agriculture GDP. And earlier, of course, it was just about 0.4% or something like that. This is not agriculture research or R&D, but we see the breakup of this. It is just 0.4% on research and 0.2% on extension kind of things. And when you compare with the spending with developed countries, where it is as much as 2 to 2.5% of their agricultural GDP, even in sub-Saharan Africa, some of the countries, they have a higher spending than what we spend on agriculture research R&D. It is about 2.4% or some 2.5% or something like that. Maybe it is the kind of things that we used to have earlier in the beginning of the Green Revolution period. Now, changing reality of the food system, our main basic duty enhancements. Achieve that objective a long back, maybe about 10, 15 years. Now we are surplus in many of the food commodities. So we have, but there is always an apprehension in the minds of the policymakers as well as the researcher. If something happens to agriculture, there is some kind of climatic shocks and all those kind of things, then suddenly it creates a fear in our minds that what will happen to our food security. But we never shifted our focus to research focus to other commodities, particularly when you talk about the nutrition research, improving the quality of the research. Have we invested enough on the biofortification research? Of course, recently some ICR has come out with a number of varieties of some crops, biofortified crops. But have we taken a lead in this kind of situation, particularly when India is the hotspot of undernourished population in the world? The second issue, of course, you flagged in the beginning itself, that a climate resilient agriculture. Of course, we are now gradually shifting toward that. Let me tell you that be harmful to the developing countries like India, which we are located in the tropics and lack resources, institution and financing for managing the risk. In one of our recent studies, what I observed is that these climatic risks, they reduce our agricultural growth by 1/4 from the historical rate of growth of about 3%. Now, if this kind of situation prevails and we are not prepared for that, then it will be really a difficult situation to cope up with the food security or the nutritional security in the times to come. And in fact, in the climate resilient agriculture stations, But one issue, of course, that you raised, that the risk, that is the farmers who bear the entire risk of the production risk, no any other stakeholder on the value chains. Now the question is how we can shift this risk from farmers to the other stakeholders. When I talk about the other stakeholder, government should be the main stakeholders. But what is the fate of our Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana? It has not succeeded much, despite the premium being heavily subsidized. So crop insurance is one mechanism, but we have to again see why farmers are not adopting. Again, let me tell you about my recent the work which I have been doing just out of quest. We thought that why crop insurance? People say, okay, farmers don't understand it, farmers don't have credit, liquidity constraints, and all those kind of things. But have you really thought of the alternative risk management strategies or self-risk crop diversification or the irrigation? And what I observed, I just compared with the benefits of the crop insurance with irrigation. It was the irrigation that yielded more of the income benefits as well as the risk reducing benefits. So we have to go for some time when the farmers feel that they have to premium and they don't get this back, because the claim settlement ratio, it is very bad in the country. So why not the government should go for this kind of things, say either promote the climate resilient varieties or the subsidy or the climate resilient practices, or let the government should free crop insurance for every farmers. Let it should be compulsory. If there is a risk, then the farmers will get benefit out of that. But what is the way out? Of course, Suresh Kumarji has partly hinted on the issue on the subsidies and all those kind of things. You know what we are, this one, so current our subsidy bill is 2.5 lakh crore, something like that. Now, if you convert it to on per hectare basis, it comes around 18,000 rupees per hectare of net sown area. And if you add another 6,000 that we give under PM, question is, can we repackage it rather than giving the input subsidies or the MSP to the farmers? Can it be repackaged and linked to some kind of payment of eco system services? But I think Suresh Kumarji will admit it that the political economy of these subsidies, it is very complex. And once these are provided for, it is very difficult for the governments to withdraw this. But this is one issue that particularly the government should think about, of shifting this kind of subsidies, transforming the subsidies into some kind of package for the sustainable agriculture. And of course, there are strong arguments for that, because again, as we are talking about, it is the agriculture is inherently a risky enterprise, and farmers' frequent exposure to climatic shocks, it widens the gap between the realized and the potential returns from farming. Now, secondly, of course, that ecosystem services. When we talk about the ecosystem service, the farmers provide ecosystem services free of cost to the society through their land management, water management, and all those kind of things. So farmers, they need to be incentivized, but the problem is how to put a value to the ecosystem services. Of course, there are certain kind of services, say for example, organic farming, you can easily put a value. You can put a value to the biological nitrogen fixation by the leguminous crops. But there are a number of other ecosystem services that would need some kind of scientific basis for putting evaluation to this. And once it is done, then I think gradually we should shift this from the regime of subsidies and support to the sustainable kind of financial support to the farmers. Now, again, your second question was related to the public-private partnership. Now, there is considerable scope, particularly for the public-private partnership of in agriculture research. No, that again, of course, as I said, the research has to shift its focus to multiple goals. the goals of productivity enhancements, the climate resilience, the new services. So, but again, we have to prioritize where we have to invest. We have to prioritize our research agenda based on the demand, what the consumers demand, what the farmers demand, and where we should focus. Now, again, here comes the role of, a lot of other things, particularly the seed companies or the fertilizer companies or the pesticide companies. They can very easily, enter into some kind of collaboration with the public research institutions for improving the quality of their produce, for the new molecules or new kind of fertilizers and all those kind of things. And again, in the changing environment, particularly the role of artificial intelligence, or you say robotics.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Berthel,
Yeah.
your video has gone off. Can you please check? And I think the bandwidth is also, we can't intermittently hear you well.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, and Dr. Bittel, just half a minute, please, more.
Okay, okay, sir. But again, this kind of drones or the our remote sensing kind of things. Then again, one issue that of course, apart from the seed, there is a lot of scope of the horticulture crops. So private sector can increasingly contribute, can participate, and of course, the private companies whose business is dependent on agriculture, they should invest in agriculture research, contribute to agriculture funds for the research based on their own demands or on their perceptions and feedback to the public sector institutions like the ICR. Thank you, Rinam sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. You made two very important points. One is about the amount of subsidies, because Dr. Ramesh Chand from Niti Aayog also makes a very strong statement on that. And secondly, a statement on climate resilient crops would lead to lower productivity. That's quite a statement you made. We'd like to know more about that. And now I'll move to Aaron. Welcome, Aaron. Welcome to the only international participant, a very experienced person in the certification area. Aaron, we have seen food systems, especially the aquaculture sector, globally, and it's very difficult to define sustainability. It's a tough word. We are learning all the way as to what sustainability means. And one of the ways we react globally is to build up different kind of standards, whether we have the ASC, whether we have Bonsu Pro, or we have, for palm oil, a different standard. Now, what do you think is the role of these standards? And do you think these global standards, one model fits all, could work for a country like India? And you also heard the different perspectives coming out from India, very fragmented, doing well at the global level, at the gross level, but huge issues at the micro level. How do you see the Indian system moving towards more sustainable when there are so many issues to be fixed? Let's stick to your aquaculture sector, in which you are an expert.
Well, thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to be here. I very much appreciate it. I guess from my view, with regards to standards and certification, I guess in some ways for farmers, it's starting to look like another one of the allied industries that seems to be making more money off farm supply chains than adding value. And I think that that's something that we have to be very careful of. As was noted, the farmers are the ones taking the risk, but yet all of these allied industries seem to be reaping the rewards for the risks. And so we don't want a situation where say a certification is not providing some kind of value to the farmers that they can capture, because otherwise it gets the farmers into traps. Now the certifications themselves, I think what they do is they raise the awareness of key issues that need to be addressed. But I think that there's change coming in the international trade and with certifications, because we're seeing some of the pitfalls, some of the stumbles of certification. And I think that primarily, we're going to need to get back to some fundamental aspects of sustainability. I mean, are our natural resources renewable? This is the most important, these are the most important things to be producing for human sustenance. I mean, everything that we have or own comes from the natural resources, right? This has to be protected so that we can have this renewability, such that farmers can continue. And I think it's a bit scary to hear about all of the subsidies, because what the subsidies really indicate is, as is, it's not sustainable. So then, if as is not sustainable, and you're subsidizing that, then it creates some real challenges for farmers to operate in a free market type of system, and that creates traps. That creates traps in debt. It creates traps in poverty. And I think that the other piece, and I really appreciated the comment about nutrition security instead of food security. I think that that's really key. And I think that that's one of the aspects that we need to look at when we think about sustainability too. There's lots of debates about what food products are more sustainable. But I think the food is the delivery mechanism, right? The nutrients are what we want to get inside a person's body. So what you need to be looking at is how much of the nutrients are getting delivered to the human body, and what's the environmental cost of that. And so it could be independent of whether it's plant or animal, it could be aquatic, whatever. I think that the key is that, are we getting enough nutrition? Is this a nutritious food? And is it worth the price to produce it? And I have to say that I'm also really, in some ways, I get saddened because I hear the things that in the U.S. we are subsidizing now. We're subsidizing a rice farm in California at $1 million a year. One of the most water-stressed places to be growing rice. And I guess I just keep going back to these subsidies and worry. I worry that the same mistakes will be made again. I think that as far as sustainability goes, we're going to need to buffer ourselves from climate change as best we can. That means that we're not going to be able to have new frontiers in agriculture, I don't believe. I think what land and habitat we've converted, that's what we're going to have to work with from now on. There's not going to be a new revolution. So that means we have to get more efficient. That means we have to get more precise. That means we have to get better educated and more informed. And so I think that's, I mean, and then there's no way out of that, but we have to get better. There is no way out of that. It's just how much better can we get, and in how quick of a time. So the last thing I'd just like to say is that we know, you know more than me, what it takes to have a viable livelihood in Punjab province, right? And if food systems are to be able to afford for a viable livelihood, then it seems like there needs to be a bit of a reset on the value provided to the farmer for the crops that they produce. Now, I'm not saying that in subsidies, but I'm saying that with regards to some strategic direction with regards to policy, that really looks at. I recognize the aspect of nutrition security, but I guess that's a step in the direction of poverty alleviation, right? And so we can't have our targets set at just nutrition security. It needs to go there and beyond, right? We need to get people the nutrients they need, and then we need to go beyond that, and we need to elevate them out of poverty. And when you're talking about increased debt, increased inputs, increased subsidies, that's just not the direction to lift people out of poverty. So that's my thoughts from the outside world.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thanks for putting the subsidy agenda. It's not only an India problem, it's a global problem. And you also alluded to, that there's a limited resources out there. We'll have to make do with that. So you are implying circular economy, regenerative agriculture, addressing the issue of food loss and food waste. Thank you so much, Aaron, for your views. Now I'd like to move over to Mr. Suresh Kumar. The question I have for you is, sir, it's an elephant in the room, sir. Let's face it, we live in a political economy. Dr. Bidfal also referred to that. Now, how much does this in the fact that our policymakers, and again, it's a global problem. And in India, we have more than 50% of the people who are directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture for their livelihood. Now, how much of being a part of this political economy, it inhibits good policy making or optimal policy making? Your views on that, sir?
Thank you, Arindam. I deliberately avoided to discuss political economy and the politics of agriculture, or politics of food systems.
We can't run away from that, sir. It's there.
We cannot run away. As a policy maker, this is a famous saying, and our colleagues from India and friends from India know it. The first contact of a politician when he gets into government is the IAS officer. And IAS officers, the civil servants, have to kind of show them the way through the governance, the complex and the kind of difficult governance systems, and over the years we've seen through and we are passing through. See, the political economy of the food system is very, very difficult to define. See, what politicians are looking for. They don't want anybody to lose livelihood. They don't want people to go hungry. They don't want people to feel that we are damaging in any way the kind of the farming, the producers, or for that matter, any class, any group or any community involved in agriculture, production systems, and things like that. Also, if anybody feels that they are not aware of the implication, whether they are the environmental damages, the damages to natural resources, or unbearable, unsustainable subsidies, they know it all. The question here is, what should we do? Should we transition in a gradual way without caring for the political ideology or political differences? Or should we do some knee-jerk reactions, policy changes, which probably shakes up the system? I'll give you the example of the recent farm legislations. I have gone through the legislations. I'm pleased to say we have formulated the response of Punjab government. We have given the special provisions or the amendments we intend to have in these legislations. Now, what are these legislations claiming to be? What is the political economy? That one example will clarify the whole thought process. So they say the APMC acts are non-transparent, the market is monopolized, there are intermediaries and artiyas. As a result, we need to make the system more transparent, less involvement of regulations, regulations and less laws and less government interference. They want to make the market more open, competitive. But is that all? Is that all the thing is? I have never understood. I've gone through the law, very well drafted legislation. I mean, the people who have drafted it need compliments. But are they really farm laws? They are trade laws. Is it not the thinking in the government of India at the political level that since agricultural contribution is declining in the national GDP, we should give less trade and encourage more trade? The trade as a percentage of GDP has risen in the last post-1992 reforms. Today, it's 55% of the GDP comes from the trading and the service sector. Agriculture gives you 14%, 13%, 12%, maybe it's declining. But that is the reason to shift from the traditional systems, traditional knowledge-based, traditional marketing systems, traditional production systems, to systems which encourage more trade? Are we supporting as a political system more traders and not farmers? Punjab is even today being blamed for, the government is being blamed that we are playing politics with the farmers and we are probably encouraging farmers to agitate because of some vote politics. That is not really true. We do not want the political economy of Punjab. Punjab agriculture is such that nearly 80% of the land is owned by 20% of the population. They control the landed resources. They control this. The agriculture production in Punjab gives me 100,000 crore every year. And that 100,000 crore sustains Punjab economy. Out of that 100,000 crore worth of production, agriculture production in the state, 70,000 crore is the government procurement, government of India purchases. Suddenly, if you want to stop and change and overhaul the system, that will not work. The philosophy level at the national level may not gel with they may not fully reflect on the ground realities. The Punjab politicians have to reflect on the local situation, and the recent legislations have not given. Everywhere in the world, ever since 1947, and I'll stop with that comment if that answers your question, Arindam. In all the concurrent legislations, whether it is a National Food Security Act, whether it is a National Human Rights Act, whether it is a Right Information Act, whether it is the Right to Education Act, whether it is the Land Acquisition, the new Land Acquisition Act, all these concurrent legislation, the legislation on the state subject, some space is conceded to the states to reflect on the local context, make some contextual adjustments, make some contextual recruitments, allow some contextual local incentives. Nothing of the sort has been allowed in the national legislations. They have ignored the political economy of Punjab Green Revolution states and gone for a trade economy, global economy, competitive market. Can 2.5 acres, 86.2% farmers, as I said earlier, own less than 5 acres. Out of the half of them have less than 2.5 acres. Can such a farmer compete with the big buyers, the big players in the market? What kind of a support they need? What kind of a service management they need? Nothing of the sort. Because today, political establishment is more pro-trade, pro-industry, pro-corporates. Suddenly you want to get into a political gamification, and that gamification wants to kind of do damage the livelihood of small and marginal. The local the Punjab's political economy, political economy of Punjab's agriculture doesn't allow it. Maybe the national politics allows that we should go do more trade. I don't know. There is a disconnect, lack of synergy in the national policies and the state policies, which is rising. The drift is becoming more wide. If that happens in agriculture sector, in a sector which admittedly provides livelihood to 50%, which admittedly gives the food security, which admittedly can ensure nutrition security, there are issues of sustainability. I'm not denying that. There are the business as usual, even in Punjab and Green Revolution areas cannot go on. But at the same time, there's a way forward, and that's a gradual way. You create alternate systems, you create alternate structures, you transform the existing markets, you liberalize the regulation. We did it in April 2017. We liberalized the APMC Act, and on the recommendations of NITI Aayog. Now they have gone a step ahead. They said, no, your liberalization is not adequate. We want to totally deregulate. Now somebody in the political establishment can small farmers succeed in getting remunerative prices, enough prices for their survival. This last word on subsidies. These are huge subsidies. You, me, all, everybody says these are agriculture subsidies or food subsidies or farm subsidies. Are they really farm subsidies? Do the benefit really go to the farmers? To me, these are consumer subsidies. Why do you subsidize fertilizer? Why do you subsidize credit? Why do you subsidize all inputs? Why do you give transportation subsidy? Why do you give many other incentives to the farmers? Because you want to depress the prices of the food for the consumer. Take, for example, and one example should clarify to Murli and other friends here. And that is that we give about 7,000 crore free power and free water in Punjab to the farmers. This 7,000 crore which Punjab government spends is not included in the MSP for the farmers, because the MSP provides for the cost incurred by the farmer, not the subsidies given by the government. So the farmer doesn't get paid for the subsidies which government of India is giving. Farmer only gets paid for the cost which he or she is incurring. As a result, these subsidies, the benefit of subsidies goes in depressing the food prices in the market, and the benefit goes to the common man and the consumer. It is not benefit to the farm producer. So how are these farm subsidies then? They are consumer subsidies. You want to have the food at its affordable levels. You want to see that everybody gets a cheaper or a affordable price for the food, pays that. We are giving consumer subsidy, but we are not enabling the consumers to get better jobs, better income, better sources of livelihood to procure food. We are not seeing it. We are saying farm subsidies, whereas it's not really farm subsidy. Invest that much money, give the farmers a full value, full input cost. As so Dr. Swaminathan has said, cost plus 50%, give it to that. Invest this for 300,000 or 400,000 crore. We are calling it farm subsidy. Invest it in job creation, livelihood improvement, give those jobs and enable people for enough incomes. They should be able to buy their food. What is the problem in that? So the whole economy doesn't work it, because you have to package it to show it that you are doing it for the farmers to get their votes. That's the political economy of the agriculture. Truly, they are not.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for bringing up this topic. Another elephant in the room, it's consumer price versus, farmer income. Thank you so much. Now we have very little time left. I'm sorry, I'll have to jump to the last question. It's a quick fire round. So Mr. Murli, first to you. 2 wishes from the private sector, not from the government, because all of us ask n number of things the government should do. How can the private sector help to make farmer livelihood better?
I think the most important thing is investing in infrastructure, which would help farmers to have easy access to processing facilities. I think that's when I say processing facility, it includes storage facility as well. I think in my experience, this is a major gap. Although government has been making quite a lot of effort, it is still an area where there are huge gaps. I think unless the private sector comes forward to make investment for developing more easily accessible kind of infrastructure for farmers for processing and storage, I think farmers' ability to hold the produce as well as to market the produce for better price will not, those kind of opportunities will not improve. That's number one. I think number two also, the providing link between the safe food producer and the consumer. I think the quality parameters, the certification process, etc., has to become more farmer friendly. Also, some kind of accompanying support. It is happening in isolated cases, but I think those private sector organizations which are engaged in marketing produce to the consumer should also share the responsibility of being with the farmer in going through a transition process to adopt more sustainable kind of production system. I think sharing that kind of responsibility also means sharing the cost of it. I think these are not very traditional areas where private sector is very actively engaged. I think private sector should come forward in the interest of the larger society, in the interest of their own businesses, and also in the interest of the farmer and the nature. I would say these two are most important areas. And third, I think the whole issue of building farmers' institutions.
Mr. Murli, we need to move on, please. We are just running out of time. Huh? Thanks for your inputs. Your first 2 points are very well taken. Thank you so much. Dr. Bittal, over to you. Now, you did mention about the use of technology. Now, one of the biggest challenges, the information asymmetry out there in a complicated, fragmented country like ours, which leads to very high transaction cost and risk cost. Can modern technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, drones, satellites, etc., make a difference to enable climate smart agriculture and address other complexities, please? Your views on that? Very 2 minutes.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Definitely, because this artificial intelligence or remote sensing or drone, etc., all these kind of things, they provide very good information, feed good information to the information system that provides information to the farmers. And here the lack is because the farmers, if he wants one information, say for example on inputs, then he wants information on weather forecast or information on some other kind of things. Now he has to go for search for this information to different kind, sources. Sometimes he looks towards IMD for the weather forecast, or some universities for the technologies. So my suggestions here is that there should be a common platform from where the farmers can get the information in one go at any kind of information, be it related to weather forecast or pest management or the irrigation management kind of things. So once it is available, the transaction costs to the providers of the technology as well as to those who access the technology, that is the farmers, they will come down drastically. So this is one issue, of course, that we taken care of. Now, another thing is, of course, what I suggest is that because this sustainability world, now it is, always, we are always in a fear of drastic steps, sustainable food system. So here, now, there are three things. What we required? We required a good land use planning. And that remote sensing or the robotics and all these kind of things, they can provide information for the land use. We have the soil maps, the soil quality maps. We have the groundwater maps. We have the rainfall maps. Can't we superimpose all these together and come out with the cropping patterns that are suited to a particular kind of natural resource endowments and the climatic conditions? And in this context, I think this Telangana government steps of regulated farming, it's a right step in that direction. And we should move towards that kind of system gradually, so that we can align our food system to the changing realities of the environment and, of course, the to changing realities of the policy making process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. And moving over to Arun, now, any advice, suggestions that you have for all the important stakeholders who are sitting here? We have policymakers, we have people from the research institutions, we have leaders from the pharma organization, as to what are the one or two key things that India needs to do immediately in the next 3 to 4 years, please. You're on mute, please.
Yeah, it's a big question for me, but I cut in listening. It was really a fascinating discussion, and I think a lot of it has to do with describing the end state that you want to see. I mean, you want to see these farmers that have viable livelihoods, that their work is taking them up and out of poverty. You want to see that there's nutrition security. You want to see that consumers can afford the food. I think that in some ways, starting at the end and working your way back, you could see that if it's really even possible, what everybody has described a bit of, which is the change that needs to happen. And I guess the one thing that seems to just be out of our control is climate change. I mean, humanity has shown that we can't get our hands around this. And so that's a fundamental disruptor that you really need to be preparing for. Otherwise, I mean, if you don't have control over this issue, then you better be proactive in how you buffer the food system from the shocks that are going to come.
Thank you so much, Arun. And thanks to all the panelists. Mr. Suresh Kumar, I didn't ask you a follow-up question because I'll pick it up from the Q&A. And the first question is to you. And we are officially starting the Q&A section now. We just have 10 minutes. Most of the questions that are coming up are very similar in nature, but there's one very interesting question that has come up. How can we integrate the true cost of food systems? A very complex question, but a very pertinent question. How do we identify and develop a set of science-based and economic pathways in support of state-led food system transformation. So it's more about the true cost of food system, something you talked about very passionately.
See, Arundam, it's very difficult to answer a question like this. It depends what the thought process. See, the food world over, my colleagues and friends, even Erin would know, food all over the world is subsidized.
So absolutely.
Food is subsidized not because farmers have to be helped. Food is subsidized because in any developing economy, the food has to be affordable and everybody has to be fed at a reasonable cost. It is not the cost of production which we concentrate in, it's most to the consumer, because if everybody gets enough food at affordable price, that's the first objective. Nobody goes hungry. Now, second question which a government is always confronted, if you have made up your mind that, okay, this is the cost at which the food, if available, everybody will have enough to buy and enough to pay for. That is where you try how much stocks you need. And when you need enough stocks to produce, let's say we need 80 million, 100 million tons of wheat and this million tons of wheat, there's a production plan of the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India. They know the country's demand and supply situation. And they do plan for every crop, every summer, winter, and kharif and rabi crops. Knowing that, they incentivize the farmers. Not many of us will know, even wheat subsidy, wheat seed is still subsidized in this country. Fertilizer is subsidized, water is free, agriculture in most of the states, energy or electricity in most of the countries nominal or free. Why is subsidies? Because if you have to see what is your end result or end goal, and goal is affordable food prices, and affordable availability of quality food. That is the objective, and we work backwards to see at what price the farmers should be compensated. The farmer gets cost plus something, some remuneration. And that is where the food economy or the even political economy of the food system revolves around. That you have to give sufficient spending money over and above the cost the farmers incur despite subsidies or despite whatever incentives we give them. And farmers have some space, some more money to spend. And at the same time, the food prices do not run. And the buffer, the trade-off is the subsidies come from the government. That in any case is public money. So it's a larger national issue, which the Ministry of Agriculture, all of us are working all the time. There's annual crop-wise assessments of the costing of the production, the cost of productions are assessed, and then the market is assessed. How much can we allow the market to food prices to rise? Food prices cannot go beyond a point, and the food prices cannot go beyond a point. The farmers, the purchase prices from the producer cannot be raised beyond a point. But if the purchase prices of the farmers' price cannot be allowed to go beyond a point, then their cost has to be subsidized. And subsidy is determined on that basis. Subsidy is not determined on the basis of its sustainability. Yes, sustainability, affordability for the national exchequer, a consolidated fund of India, or for the governments and states, and those questions are there. But actual amount of subsidy depends how much space you have to play around in the market. So these I mean, very difficult X amount of Y amount. But if the food prices have to be kept affordable, subsidy bills are rising, and that's a dilemma, a paradox for the national government, which over time we may find a solution, but not today.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. One last question we are running before I hand over to Vidya to sum up the entire session. This is a question for Dr. Bittal. It's a question which is very hot in Europe right now. I don't know whether it's relevant for India at this point of time. It talks about feeding 10 billion people, the global population by 2050, as FAO has estimated. How important is it to encourage people of India to shift towards plant-based food to cut down meat and animal product consumption? That's about animal protein. We are per capita wise one of the lowest animal protein consumer today. But having said that, animal protein has huge climate implications. So Dr. Bittal, your view on this, please, on this question.
Yeah, yes, of course, there is no denying that fact that we have to feed 10 billion people by 2050. And as in the past, the technology has provided us the solutions. So this is my for the question, this answer to the first questions. There will not be any much problem provided we invest in agriculture research. The second is, of course, that shifting from plant-based diets, animal-based diets to plant-based diet. This is, of course, a problem for the European countries or the US or the high level kind of thing. What we consume very less. Either the meat or milk consumption is also like that. So of course, there is no denying that fact that water to produce 1 liter of milk is also water required to produce 1 liter of milk is about 5,000 liters. So for meat, it is about 15,000 liters or something like that. So definitely when we cut down on the animal proteins, so definitely there will be a trade-off also. Maybe it will adversely affect the nutrition of the children or the lactating mothers or the undernourished populations, but we have to strike a balance. We have to strike a balance. So how we can do is that, of course, we raise the animal productivity. Till date, most of the growth in our animal sector, or so whether it's the milk or meat, it has come from the increase in the numbers. That, of course, they are creating some kind of pressure on the natural resources, be it the land or water. But the time has come that we should invest more in livestock research for productivity improvement and for climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. One last question I'd like to ask is, now this is about COVID. I mean, it's a burning question. What are the 3 key lessons from COVID-19? Did the pandemic-related disruption highlight any fragility of the food system? Dr. Suresh Kumar, to some extent, addressed that. How are we contributing to the forthcoming UN Food Systems Summit 2021? So if anybody can take up, I think I'll ask Mr. Murli from the farmers level, what was the impact so far as the business on the farmers was concerned and the consumers that the farmers were addressing? How much was the disruption and how much of business as usual happened during COVID times?
I think farmers have experienced disruption of 2 kinds. Number one, as consumers, the supply chain was disrupted, as a result of which their food commodities needed in the rural areas as well as the inputs required for agriculture suffered. The supply system suffered, because of which there was deficiency faced by the farmers, both for food commodities in their own homes as well as agriculture input. Secondly, mainly the farmers producing meat, milk and vegetables could not really send their produce to the market in time. I think the fragileness of the entire supply system, on which today's food system is greatly dependent, has been very clearly proved because of the COVID pandemic situation. I think in my experience, I've seen both kinds of hardship suffering faced by the farmers during the COVID-19 pandemic situation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Murli. It's 6 p.m. I will officially close the session. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much, WWF. The topic you have chosen, it's a very passionate topic. There's a lot to say. I don't think we can do justice in 90 minutes, but we got excellent points from the 4 esteemed speakers. And we look forward to having not only more discussions, but action on the ground to be able to make the world a better place to live in. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, WWF, once again. Vidya, any last comment you'd like to make?
No, I would just like to thank you very much. I would just like to thank each of the speakers, and I think we've got a very, very good direction and really key points to take forward, and look forward to working with all you in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Right.